Let's take a look at getting started with Synchron Player and Vienna Smart Orchestra. Now, in the preset category on the right here, you're going to see under Vienna Smart Orchestra that there's three main instruments, and there's a variety of effects presets, which we'll look at. But I've got the main one loaded in here. So what are we looking at? At the heart and soul of the Synchron Player and Vienna Smart Orchestra is what's called the dimension tree. These vertical rows or slots are called dimensions. And the idea is that the signal always flows from left to right to determine what's loaded and what's playing and what you're hearing. Now, the highlighted slots with the white frames show the selected slots in each dimension. So you're always reading from left to right until you get to the patch slot that contains the played articulation. So for example, here, I've got the full orchestra loaded in, short articulations plus a percussion mapping. And of those short articulations, I have a choice of staccato or pizzicato and staccato combined. So because this is what's highlighted, this is what I'll hear. So I'm hearing staccato articulations, but of what instruments? That's based on what we have here. Now this little icon indicates parallel mode. When it's on, meaning when it's blue like this, we'll hear all of these slots together, layered, or we can assign a controller here to crossfade between them. And when it's off, we'll hear just the selected one. So for example, strings, woodwinds, brass, and percussion is mapped differently. We'll get to that in a moment. Or all of them together for a nice big full sound when we're with the orchestra. Now the controller assigned to each dimension can be chosen from a variety of options in this menu here. So right now, to move between these different slots, we're using key switch notes, and that's starting on C0. So you set here where you want them to start, and they'll go up chromatically depending on how many slots you have here. And you can add slots with this button, or you can right-click and delete them. So we have that, and we can also use white notes only or program change messages, or the dimension control knob, which is a unique knob, and we have a control knob that appears when it's selected, as well as a fader here. And we can see that with the Marcato patches. It's already assigned here. When I go to long and percussion, for Marcato, we have control 3, which is assigned to this dimension A, and that'll move between these two, crossfading the normal and the Marcato together. So for example, I'll take this off, so we're not in parallel mode. Here's normal and Marcato. And with it on, we can move between them. Each dimension can be labeled, and the key switches will be displayed in the color of the dimension on the keyboard below. So we see the colors here pertaining to the colors of the different sections here. And we also get a key info window. So if I click on this where it says instruments, this will correspond to here. And we can see the mappings in this window here. So there are the blue instruments there, the type and the articulations. And then up high, we have the percussion mapping. And all of the assigned controls are also listed in this perform view right underneath the dimension tree. So we see volume, expression, velocity, crossfade, legato, blur, etc. And we can scroll over and we get different sliders for each of the individual sections. So we can mix the levels of the different sections. We've got another tab here for control, which is another way of influencing some of the parameters. And we have an edit tab for more detailed editing based on what's selected. And we have a mix tab with a full-featured mixer. When we're using the multiple output instance of Synchron Player, we can assign to the multiple outputs there. And we have different effects and sends that we can set up. We'll look at the mixer in more detail in later videos, but different effects and sends for each of the sections. And if we scroll over, we'll see that there are 3 different mixer presets for the full Smart Orchestra patch that we're working with now. They're on the right. And right now we have close, ambient, or distant. So here's the close mic sound, ambient with a bit more reverb, and distant. Now, there are a couple of parameters we can set optionally for Smart Orchestra. When we go under the gear icon, By default, the interface here, middle C is set to C4, but we can change it to C3 or C5 depending on what kind of control you're using. And when you do that, of course, it'll influence the range of the playable notes versus the key switches. I'm going to leave it at C4 for the moment. Now we've got three basic instruments that come with Smart Orchestra: the full orchestra, and then we have one with bass instruments reduced, meaning lower memory requirements, and one with no bass instruments for when you want to program them separately. And we have the orchestra, and in orchestra we have short articulations, long articulations, both with percussion. So let's look at the percussion mapping now. They start on D up high, and we have bass drum, then bass drum rolls, another bass drum, snares, rolls and single hits, different cymbals and gongs, triangle, tambourine, tambourine roll, single hit, more snare drum hits, cymbal roll, and some concert toms. So really useful. So when we're working in here, we get those in the upper octaves. And when we're working with short articulations, we have the option of orchestra with mallets, where we get this added on, and we have a separate fader where we can bring them up and blend them. Now we can also get the individual sections. So for example, if you want strings only, I can layer them together. Woodwinds, and we'll see here that because I have parallel mode on, I can get the percussion up high in addition to this selected articulation. Brass, same thing, I can get percussion together with it. And mallets. Now we also have 6 solo instruments: violins, flute, oboe, clarinet, trumpet, and French horn. And notice those nice legato transitions. Now we can also access these solo instruments in combination with the different sections. So these are great if you want to use a separate instance of a Vienna Smart Orchestra to program this on a different track. But when we're in the full orchestra mode, we have this category, which we haven't looked at yet, called Pad plus Solo. So this gives us a reduced set of the sections that we have here, plus we have solo instruments on top. So for example, here I have the full orchestra, and I have these different ensembles. I'm going to go with the regular pad, and I'll have French horn on top. Maybe I want to have just strings on the bottom, and maybe a flute on top. So you can combine like that and use the key switch notes to move around. So we have C0 to F sharp 0 by default, but of course they're easily reassignable for the presets. And then the type switches, A0 to B0, articulation or ensemble switches from C1 up. Then we have solo instruments, and then we can move between these with another controller that we can assign. So there's an overview of the general environment we're going to be working in. In the next video, we'll look at the effects presets, and then we'll dig into different workflows and ways of working with all these functions and getting the most out of them. See you for more in the next video.